Oh, why did you start the broadcast?
Oh, I'm sorry.
We have about 30 members on the line. So I think, okay. So right now,
please.
Okay, so you have the organizer and the presenter rights at the moment. So when you run the slideshow, you should automatically see, right now you're not in the slideshow mode. You can run the presentation.
If I put it like this.
Bottom right corner.
I can now see the presenter's view and but it seems, what can you see now?
I can see your other slides also. Yeah, the notes.
But that doesn't work.
No. So do you have two monitors in front of you?
I have one monitor.
One monitor. And in sharing, I think there should be an option to share. Why is it showing two screens? It's showing your. Can you press F5 on the keyboard?
Yes.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us today on this very interesting and popular topic around tax as a force for good, rebalancing our tax systems to support a global economy which is fit for the future. Today we have with us Yen-Pei Chen. I'll just introduce her. We also have Femke with us. And the third speaker for today is Umar Zahir Mir. So I'll very quickly introduce the three speakers, and then I'll do some housekeeping, after which I'll hand over to Yen-Pei. So about Yen-Pei, Yen-Pei is a tax and corporate reporting manager within ACCA's Professional Insights team. And I hope all of you know the Professional Insights team churns out a lot of technical, highly popular reports on different subjects. Yen-Pei is leading research and policy input and public speaking engagement in the areas of tax, integrated reporting, and corporate reporting. She's a qualified accountant and contributes regularly to consultation input both at the national and EU levels. In the UK, she engages directly with HM Revenue and Customs to advise the tax administration on tax policy matters. Yen-Pei is ACCA's lead for the report tax as a force for good, rebalancing our tax system to support a global economy fit for the future, which is the report that we're going to discuss today. As well as the Insights into Integrated Reporting series. Yen-Pei is a member of the UK HM Revenue and Customs Tax and Accounting Working Group and participates in Accountancy Europe's Corporate Reporting Policy Working Group. Yen-Pei also convenes ACCA's Global Forum for Taxation, and I must mention that Umar is a member of the forum as well, representing Pakistan. Prior to joining ACCA, she worked as a subject matter expert, audit and corporate reporting for BPP Learning Media, authoring learning and reference material for accountancy students and finance professionals. As corporate tax advisor at EY, she also has extensive experience advising and auditing multinational groups and SMEs from diverse sectors. She has a master's in European business from the European School of Management and a BA from the University of Cambridge. Thank you very much, Yen-Pei, for joining us, and welcome to the webinar. Our next speaker is Femke, and Femke is the president and wave maker Tax. You can see Femke, the video just came on. Femke is the co-author and president of the Tax project. The website, if you want to access it, is www.x-tax.com. A think tank focused on fiscal innovations to boost the SDGs and the inclusive circular economy. The foundation works with experts and business leaders to enhance the understanding of dynamics of tax shift from labor to natural resource use and pollution, which is what we were discussing over yesterday, if you remember, in the session that we were holding. Femke is an analyst, advisor, publicist, and a public speaker. Between 1999 and 2009, she was an investment manager at Xtax Greens Venture Capital, a Dutch impact investment fund. And our third panelist for today is Umar Zahir Mir. Umar is a managing partner for Millennium Law Corporate Company, and he looks after the corporate and tax law at MLCC. Umar is also the chair of the Members Network Panel for Pakistan, and is also the head of the Taxation Subcommittee for Pakistan. And like I already said before, Umar represents Pakistan on ACCA's Global Taxation Forum as well. So that was the introduction of the panelists. Very quickly, some housekeeping rules. All the participants throughout the call will stay on mute. You have since you've joined, you'll have an extra menu available to you through which you will be able to ask your questions. So if you notice in that menu, there is a questions dialog box. You can type in your questions, and those questions will be picked up by us, and I will then, during the question and answer break, or the question and answer session in the end, I will put up those questions to the panelists. So as we go along, I will encourage all the participants to keep typing in their questions, keep sending us your questions, and depending upon the relevance and importance of the question, we will then select them and put them on to put the questions up to the panelist. Secondly, a video recording of this webinar will be available to you for later viewing, which means if you want to revisit some of the content of this webinar, you will be able to do that. And straight after this session, all the participants should receive an email with the recording link from our side. Third, and last but not the least, all the participants of this webinar will receive a participation certificate from ACCA, which you can use as an evidence for your CPD. Those who view the session afterwards, which means they view the recording, they will be able to claim non-verifiable CPD units from the webinar. Thank you very much. With that, I will hand over to our first panelist, Yenpei, to run us through her presentation. Yenpei, over to you.
Great, thank you very much, Harun. Femke, if you could move the slide on. So it's a real pleasure to be here talking to you today. And as Harun has done the introductions, I'm delighted to be joined by Femke, who's written the Tax as a Force for Good report, and also by Omar, who as our global Tax Global Forum member has been very much inputting into this project, and especially taking the idea also to policymakers in Pakistan. So it's a real pleasure for the three of us to talk to you. On to the next slide, please. So as Harun mentioned, I work in the Professional Insights team. So in case some of you may not be familiar with what we do, I thought I'll just talk to you briefly about our work. So if the Professional Insights team has a strapline, it would be something like answering today's questions and preparing us for tomorrow. And this means we seek to answer the big questions around what it is to be an accountant. And we share our findings as widely as possible. So this starts inevitably with always trying to understand some of the trends that is happening around the world right now, and thinking about their wider impact, especially on the accountancy profession, but also us as human beings living on this small planet. Why is the professional insights team well placed to do this forward thinking? Well, we use our global reach across 179 countries and network of experts, and they help us to understand those forces that are shaping accountancy. And professional insights basically work to make sure that ACCA keeps leading thinking in different fields, and we influence public policy, and also we try to shape business practice on the key issues that affect accountancy. Next slide, please. So going back to, next slide after that, if you can. So going back to a year ago, or slightly more than that, when I was starting to formulate the idea for this project, it's quite a sort of personal motivation for me that got me thinking about how tax or our policies might be forces for good. If you could just click once more. I just want to show you where I come from. So I hail from Taichung. It's this little, it's the third largest city on the little island of Taiwan. And you can see it's surrounded by mountains, and it's quite a scenic city. But recently, the outlook for Taichung has changed quite a bit. So if you could click again. And this is because of what you see here. And if you could click again, sorry. Now it's much harder to see the mountains that surround Taiwan, and it's because of the Taichung power plant. It's the largest coal burning plant in the world. And for me, living in the UK, going back to Taiwan, the change has been very sudden. And you can see how quickly a policy, as in Taiwan, to switch from producing power through nuclear generation to coal can have a big impact on to everyone's lives on the island. So I started thinking about how in my role I might be able to affect some change. Now, Harun mentioned I also work on integrated reporting, and in that field, there's lots of discussions about how businesses should be more transparent in their external reporting on wider impacts, their impact on the environment and on society. But most of the time, these costs are theoretical, and as we look at reporting, you find that apart from the enlightened and responsible companies, most company boards are realistically not going to sit up and pay attention until the externalities hit the business's bottom line. And I think that's where tax comes in, because it does have the ability to hit the business's bottom line. And also, unlike direct regulation that just bans undesirable behavior, it's also a way to bring revenue to the governments, and that allows governments to then reinvest them for inclusive growth. And that's really sort of what's really attracted me and my teams to FEMCA's idea of the tax shift. So really looking at tax as one holistic system, and not trying to achieve sort of one limited outcome, but also looking at how we can use tax revenues to wider societal benefits as well. So if we can move on to the next slide. We've got a global conversation going around this proposal that you're going to hear very shortly from FEMCA. We've held a webinar in Canada, and earlier in the year, there was a conference that we jointly hosted with Deloitte in Brussels, attended by EU commissioners and policymakers. In Pakistan, there we had a roundtable jointly organized with SERB, which Omar also spoke at. And then we also worked with ICMAB to deliver a seminar which Femke presented to a very interested audience in Bangladesh. So we do definitely want to continue the conversation right through to 2020. And for this, we want to hear from you. So please do keep sending your reactions and your questions through to us during this session. And if you have anything that you would like to raise, or like us to think about, do drop us an email. I'll have the contact details at the end of this presentation. So with that, I will hand over to Femke to talk to you about what it is we're proposing. Oops, sorry.
Hello, everybody. Yeah,
Couple of slides more. Some questions. Are we able to do the poll on this session? I think the first.
Yes, we can.
Great. So the first question is just to help us understand a little bit of your involvement with tax. Either you work as a tax practitioner, so you're very familiar with it, or you deal with tax policy in government, or you may not work directly in tax but get pulled into tax-related work from time to time, or you are a tax advisor and that's your only involvement. Give you a few minutes to answer.
Yenpe, either you, Femke, or Harun, being the organizers, would need to create a poll so that the participants can then choose the relevant option and cast their votes.
I see.
I think that will take a bit of time, so the participants can just type in their option in the questions box.
Okay. So, so is it possible to see the responses, or it will only be narrative question responses from the questions box?
Yeah,
Third
through the
option,
question.
right? Third and fourth,
The
third and fourth option. And it's good that there are multiple answers coming through. Okay, so it seems some of you work in tax policy, and the majority of you don't work as a tax practitioner as such, but do have some level of interaction with tax. That's great. Thank you very much. So if we move on to the next slide. Again, then we'll be looking for your responses from the questions box. This is just to get an initial idea. Do you think, should governments shift their tax burdens from labor to natural resources and consumption? So without the sort of context for now that you will get later on. So either you agree with the proposal, you feel neutral about the proposal, or you're unsure, or you disagree. Any questions? Any points coming through on that? Don't seem to have. Okay. Some of those are
It's mostly agree and neutral.
Okay. Okay, so we're starting from a good base then. Great.
There's only probably one individual who disagrees, rest of them, they all agree.
Staying quiet. Right. So over to you, Femke.
Thank you. All right, thank you so much for the introductions. Thank you everybody for being here. We have more than 200 attendees at the moment, which is great. It's a great honor for me to be with you here today and to share our story, both of the report that we wrote, CCA, and also I'd like to share some of the findings of a study that we're currently conducting on Bangladesh as a case study. My name is Femke Groothuis. As explained, I lead a think tank focused on fiscal innovation for the SDGs and the circular economy. And in my previous life, I was an investment manager at a green investment venture capital company. So as you will notice during my presentation, we take very much the perspective of the business community and understanding the dynamics in business and the role taxes play in business decisions. So the idea that we work on is quite simple. These principles are very simple. It's to tax natural resource use and pollution and lower the tax burden on labor while increasing social spending or other types of spending. And to do that wisely, of course. This is a subject that we've been doing a lot of research on. And over the years, I've learned, and especially coming from a business background, it's pretty clear that taxes on labor actually incentivize businesses to minimize employment or to minimize formal employment, adding as formal employment adds to the cost for employers. I'm not saying this is a good thing, but it's just the drivers that we have in our business decision making. Entrepreneurs seek for ways to reduce their payroll costs, and they do that by lots and lots of different ways. For example, by shifting to automation rather than handmade products, by shifting to mass production rather than custom-made products, by lowering service levels, for example, shifting production to lower income countries. So there's lots of ways how businesses actually try and minimize the role of human labor in their business models. And when we talk about labor taxes, we mean both personal income taxes, social contributions, and payroll taxes. So we look at the broad spectrum of labor taxes. Now, on the other hand, when there are low or non-existent natural resource taxes, we use resources unrestrained. And when I say resources, natural resources, I mean the whole spectrum of natural resources, ranging from water to clean air, but also the use of metals and minerals, waste streams that we produce, etc. So all the interactions that we can have with the natural world. In OECD countries where we have a lot of data, $14.8 trillion in taxes are collected in 2016. And 51% of those tax revenues were based on labor taxes. So again, personal income tax, social contributions, and payroll taxes. Now, on the other hand, if we look at green taxes, they only provided 5% of government revenues in 2016 across OECD countries. Now, the database of the OECD contains a lot more countries than just the OECD members. Across the board in that database, labor taxes have increased in 73% of the countries in the OECD database over the 2000 to 2016 period as a percentage of GDP. This means that of the 73 countries which are in the database and have their data there, 53 actually increase their share of labor taxes as a share of GDP over the 2000 to 2016 period. So they're on the rise generally. Environmental taxes or green taxes have actually declined in a majority of the countries in the OECD database. 52 countries of the 79 that we could find recent data for have actually decreased their share of green taxes as a share of GDP. But we're not just not taxing natural resource use, we're actually subsidizing pollution. Global fossil fuel subsidies in 2017, according to the IMF, were $300 billion just in that year. And this is according to the, let's say, general definition of subsidies. So, but if we look at a broader perspective, the IMF also analyzed how much the external costs of these subsidies were. So by how much, what kind of damage are these subsidies causing? And when you include the externalities of the use of fossil fuels, the subsidies between brackets are even $5.2 trillion in 2017. There's a lot of debate on this concept, but it's very clear that if you look at the external cost of combusting fossil fuels, the cost to society are very large. Now, what we can read in these data is that financial incentives are currently aligned with the linear economy, the take, make, waste economy, in which resources are taken from the earth or taken from the air. We turn them into products, and after a very short lifetime, that we turn them into waste. In that process, we tend to minimize human input in many parts of the world. And at the same time, there's a lot of costs involved with these processes in terms of health impacts, of pollution, damaging resources, damaging forests, etc. And these costs are not borne by the polluter. So, for example, if we look at the economic cost at the left-hand corner of ocean-based plastics pollution, that's $13 billion per year. And mismanaged waste causes 400,000 to 1 million deaths each year in developing countries. Air pollution costs $5 trillion per year, and 80% of global greenhouse gas emissions are free of charge. That means that the polluter doesn't pay these costs. These costs are turned over to society or to individuals who have to pay with their life or with their health. Basically, we're draining natural capital in the world. And at the same time, human capital is growing. We're growing to 9.8 billion people by 2050. And there's a massive need for decent jobs. There's 83 million people more every year on this planet. And that means that all these people have qualities and capacities that and a need for decent living. So the SDGs came on, and they are basically humanity's to-do list for the next decades. And the interesting thing is that they marry social issues as well and environmental issues. So social and environmental issues are no longer disconnected. We understand that they are interconnected. But we do know now that the linear economy that I just explained, with all the costs and all the pollution that comes with it, is unfit for the SDG era. We're not going to achieve the SDGs if we continue on the path of the linear economy. So the SDGs are also a massive financial challenge. They're, according to the UN, they're going to cost $5 to $6 trillion per year to achieve. And developing countries alone face a financing gap of $2.5 trillion per year. As official development aid is only $153 billion per year and on a declining trend, there is a massive financing gap. So the challenge is, could business models be rethought, as UNEP Finance Initiative says, in ways that would increase SDG serving financial flows? We have to get public and private interests aligned so that making a profit also means creating value on different areas. And this is where the circular economy as a concept has come up. The circular economy is a regenerative and carbon neutral system in which resources are brought in closed loops and businesses can add value over and over again by applying smarter business models. And we're only beginning to explore this concept properly. But a number of governments have already created circular roadmaps, especially in Europe, but also China, for example. And Some are very rough or unclear. Some are very specific. The Netherlands, for example, has a goal of reducing materials use, resource use by 50% by 2030. Well, in fact, nobody knows how to get there, but it's now an official government goal. Governments also around the world are going carbon neutral. There's more understanding of the decision, and a number of countries are now stepping up to the plate and setting very ambitious targets. And the list is changing every month. So I'm sure we can probably add some more already now. So this is a big development. And then businesses are also going circular. In our Tax as a Force for Good report, we describe a number of business model innovations, and we give a selection of examples by industry. You can have a look online if you want. I'm not going to go through all of them today, but they range, from food industry to vehicles and tires and consumer goods, as well as in technology, in financial services, etc. There's a lot going on. There's a Dutch bank, ABN AMRO, for example, that has committed financing €1 billion worth of circular assets by 2020. And basically in every sector, these types of really big goals and new business models are coming up. And the circular economy means it should be good for business. It just changes the business. It means shifting from mining primary resources to urban mining, so mining secondary resources. It means moving from fossil fuels to renewables. It means moving from sale to re-commerce and rental services. And it means moving from incineration and landfilling to reuse of materials. For example, Adidas making 1 million shoes of discarded fishing nets. According to Accenture, the circular economy should be a $4.5 trillion global business opportunity by 2030. And companies are taking these strong commitments. IKEA, for example, who have just entered the market in India, I understand, have a goal to become circular by 2030. And Google has aimed for zero waste and wants to play a role in circular economy data. Artificial intelligence will be hugely important in managing resource data. Philips has decided to be circular by 2025 for their large medical equipments. And there's an initiative called the RE100, in which 152 companies have committed to 100% renewable power. And then, for example, in the fashion industry, there is a circular fashion system commitment signed by 94 companies that hold 12.5% of the global fashion market. The only thing is with the circular economy is that the business models that are needed will be more labor intensive and knowledge intensive compared to the linear business models. Because a circular economy really requires a redesign of products and supply chains. It requires a lot of R&D to develop new materials, new technology, new processes. Moving to lease models where the owner of a product, the manufacturer, actually gets the product back after a certain life cycle is more labor intensive. It requires tracking, more legal services as well, and a different financing model. Providing repair services or maintenance or refurbishment, remanufacturing, it all requires more human input. Take back systems, organizing for all those products to come back, spare parts harvesting, the urban mining, and the training that comes with that. People need to be trained to work towards these new products and supply chains. So that could be a downside, but it's, I think, an upside because it means that we can create an economic system that is more inclusive as well. Again, this is what the SDGs envision, in my opinion, a type of economic growth that is based on human capital instead of the extraction of natural resources. So, as I said, we do need tax reform to align financial incentives with those goals of the SDGs. And we think an important part of that puzzle would be to tax natural resource use and pollution rather than labor, and to increase social spending and spending on other public goods. Now, over the years, I found out that there's been a lot of support for this type of tax reform. The European Commission has been calling member states to change their tax systems for more than 20 years. The European Parliament, the OECD, the IMF, the ILO, and even the World Business Council for Sustainable Development has written about this concept. And the concept has also been put in practice in a number of countries. In Sweden, for example, Denmark, the Netherlands, and Finland, but also in Slovenia and Germany, the UK, in British Columbia and Canada, and in Colombia. But things are moving rather slow, and it's understandable because there are many barriers to implementation. I'm sure you have some barriers in your head as well right now. For one, for example, there's data availability. Can governments put a price on something that's not measured? No, you need to have a measurement system and data availability to create these types of policies. Then there's the collection tax capacity issue that plays in almost everywhere. There's the short-term interest versus long-term interest, and governments generally having a short-term perspective, as their tenure is not longer than maybe a few years. So it's hard to make policies that build towards a better future if you only have a short time frame. And then there, of course, there's business and sector interests that diverge. And there's interesting developments there, which we will touch upon. We decided to try and contribute to this discussion, and over the years we've done a number of publications to support that. First of all, in the Netherlands and the European Union, the 27 countries of the European Union, which is basically our backyard. Then we did a study for Finland on how to align their circular roadmap in a fiscal way. And then we did the report with the ACCA, and currently, as I said, we're working on a study on Bangladesh, which will be out later this year. Just to give you an idea of our findings for the European Union, this research we did with Deloitte, EY, KPMG, and PwC, who contributed pro bono to this research. We also worked with TrueCost and Cambridge Econometrics. We developed a policy toolkit, let's say a dashboard, to show which buttons governments can push to actually shift tax revenues. So on the left-hand side in blue, you will see some options for government for the use of revenues. And on the right-hand side, you will see more than 100 options for raising revenues. And there's tax bases ranging from air pollution, fossil fuels, metals and minerals, and water, also energy, waste, etc. So there's a lot of options here. One of the questions I often get is, what if a carbon tax is effective? Doesn't it erode tax revenue? In other words, is it a safe tax base for governments to go to? And my answer to that is, carbon is just one of the more than 100 options for governments to put a price on resource use. And it's probably one of the first things, or the low-hanging fruit in many countries to do, because of the sense of urgency, and sometimes also the data availability. But as most pricing schemes show, that you can plan for pricing to go up over the years if in order to make up for lost revenues, or of course governments can shift to different tax bases. And as the world is changing faster than ever before, it requires government to be agile and to be on top of the game and look at the main issues in society. I think the days are gone where governments can just set up a system and wait for 50 years to change it. We have to become more agile and more adaptive. We created from that toolkit, we created a scenario for the EU in order to illustrate what this might look like. It's not a blueprint or anything. It's meant to give this idea of what can happen if we were to shift significantly from taxing labor to natural resource use. And the scenario in the EU looked at 630 billion US dollars. So reducing labor taxes by that amount and raising the same amount by 2020. And the cost of labor would go down for both employers and employees. For employers, it would help them hire more people. There's a payroll tax credit in there, but also for consumers and the public, there's in employee social contributions to compensate for increased costs of consumption. And there's a reduction, for example, of the employer social contribution, as well as a payroll tax credit for circular innovation. On the right-hand side, there's a price on fossil fuels. There's a price, the VAT rates go up, and there's a tax on carbon, as well as an increase in electricity tax and water tax for bulk users. Then the modeling results. The results show that over the years, employment and GDP are actually higher in the scenario compared to business as usual. So there is no harm to the economy. In au contraire, it's GDP is higher than in the business as usual scenario. Energy resource use and water use, as well as carbon emissions, are down significantly compared to baseline. And this means adding more than $1,000 billion in GDP over the years. It means saving more than $34 billion in energy imports. And it means by 2020 having 6.6 million people more in employment compared to business as usual. So this research illustrates that it's not a question of having to choose between development and environment. They go hand in hand. And saving costs. So we were very, very happy to see the support for this report of Angel Gurria, the Secretary General of the OECD, who wrote based on our report that we have enough evidence to support green tax reform and concrete policy action. But a frequently asked question we always get is, what are the impacts? How does this work in low and middle income countries with different challenges or different issues? And that is super relevant. So we looked at the SDGs and noticed that tax policy targets are mentioned in 4 of the SDGs. And the first one on no poverty says we need to ensure significant mobilization of resources from a variety of sources. In SDG 10, it says adopt policies, especially fiscal, wage and social protection policies. In 12, on responsible consumption and production, it says we need to restructure taxation and phase out harmful subsidies. And then in the partnerships for the goals, goal number 17, it says we need to strengthen domestic resource mobilization. So I think, in my honest opinion, tax could have played a lot bigger role in the SDGs, but I think this is already very, very significant and important. And we found that there's potentially a large social impact. The World Bank has found out that in 60 out of 87 countries, a $30 per ton CO2 domestic carbon tax would provide the resources to more than double current levels of social assistance in the countries. So we decided to do a first case study, and we were invited to do that with the CNA Foundation. As we're still working on this work, this study, this is all just a preview, and I really hope to be able to share the final findings with you very soon. Bangladesh is an amazing country, and I hope we have a few Bangladeshi present right now. It's a country that is very, very susceptible to climate disruption. And although it's only responsible for 0.1% of global carbon emissions, it's bearing the brunt of the impacts of the climate crisis. It's expected that by 2050, 30 million people could be displaced through climate disruption. At the same time, the country is showing extreme resilience towards these challenges. So that is very admirable. With regard to pollution, the country has severe challenges as well, with 100% of the population living in areas with pollution levels that exceed WHO benchmarks. There's 165 million people living in Bangladesh, which is a very large population. And the country has a great track record of reducing poverty rates, providing electricity to its population, etc. So the country has a track record of dealing and creating effective policies. With regard to tax, the country has the third largest tax revenue gap in the world. So there is probably a need for more tax revenues. With regard to the labor market, there's 2 million people, young people, entering the labor market every year. So there's a massive need for good and decent jobs. Of course, the report will tell a lot more, give a lot more information on Bangladesh. It's too difficult to summarize a country within one short slide. But as you will appreciate, the country is in major challenges, but also has this track record of solving many issues. In our work, we have developed a methodology to take a look at different countries. So first of all, we identify national priority challenges because these differ from country to country. Then we go and look at data. How many data can we have? What do we have to work with? We build a scenario based on the possibilities and the data, as well as the priority challenges. And then we conduct a detailed exploration in order to understand the dynamics in the economy and the labor market and socially through analysis by Cambridge Econometrics, who have built a model to be able to do this type of analysis. So we expanded for this purpose the use of revenue side of our toolkit that I showed you previously, because of course in low and middle income countries, as I said, the challenges can be different, the needs and the desires as well as the goals can be different. So we try to capture them in the options for the use of revenues, and we will be developing this over the years. So if you have additional issues, I'd be more than happy to include them. We try to build scenarios based on the Bangladesh situation, and we figured that due to very limited data availability on resource use in some parts, we focused on a carbon tax for bulk emitters, which would raise $3 billion in 2025 in the scenario, and phasing out subsidies to natural gas and oil, which would raise $1.3 billion by 2025. So overall, that would raise $4.3 billion in revenues in 2025. And then we have two scenarios for the use of revenues. One is called the infrastructure scenario, in which the bulk of the revenues are invested in infrastructure. 3.6 billion is invested in infrastructure. And since Bangladesh is the second largest exporter of textiles after China, so the textile industry is the garment industry is very important. It provides 80% of the exports, and is very much depending on the fact that the subsidies for natural oil and gas, as well as for not paying on the carbon emissions. So if you phase in a price for that type of industry, the results are quite negative. So we decided to carve out part of the revenues to support that industry to invest in clean tech. So to make them more resilient and more future-proof, they could develop new technologies that use less water, that use less energy, that et cetera, et cetera. So in the infrastructure scenario, the bulk is used for infrastructure, and part of it is used for a clean tech investment in the garment sector. Then the second scenario is what we call the social spending scenario. In this case, in this scenario, most of the revenues are used for social spending for the lowest two quintiles in the Bangladesh society. And then again, the clean tech investment is at the same level in this scenario. The modeling results by Cambridge Econometrics show that in each of the scenarios, GDP levels are higher over the years compared to business as usual. So both scenarios are good for the economy. Both scenarios are also good for employment. Employment levels are higher in each of the scenarios. When we look at carbon emissions, they are each significant in each scenario, significantly lower than the baseline. So it helps reduce carbon emissions while growing the economy and employment levels. The main difference between the two scenarios is consumer expenditure. Consumer expenditure in the first scenario, the infrastructure scenario, is down compared to business as usual. It has to do with that the prices of things go up and consumers are not compensated. In the social scenario, of course, the lowest income groups are compensated, so they get to spend more and also thereby boost the local economy. So consumer expenditure in the social scenario is up compared to baseline. And of course, I often get the question on what does this mean for different low income groups. Both scenarios are progressive, but only in the social scenario, the poorest 2 quintiles actually gain in terms of real income significantly compared to third and fourth and the richest quintile. And this is in line with the findings of the World Bank saying that even though indirect taxes in general are regressive, they may not increase inequality if the proceeds largely benefit the bottom of the distribution. So careful design is very important. So the benefits for Bangladesh in the scenarios is pretty clear. There's a resource mobilization, there's higher GDP, job creation in each of the scenarios. There are significant carbon emission reductions, there's savings on energy imports, and there's public investments that differ, of course, in different scenarios. Another frequently asked question, of course, that we get is what are the impacts on businesses and sectors? Now, our research shows that most sectors, overall, the economy has a very positive impact of the scenarios, but there are exceptions. So especially the garment industry shows a small negative impact. But in the report, we also explain how they will operate in a better functioning economy, and the support in terms of clean tech investment is not yet included. But it's a challenge. It's a challenge. What we do see is that the role of business is changing significantly around the world. Businesses, as I said, are developing new business models, also in the garment industry. Many businesses are now supporting carbon pricing and are applying internal carbon pricing and water pricing. Basically from the understanding that there is no business as usual in a 1.5 degree world. Everybody will have to move. And the risks are rising. 250 of the biggest global companies have valued the climate risks to their business at $1 trillion. And these are interesting data because it means that the business community is aware of these risks and is stepping up to the plate to try and stop these risks. Interestingly, there's been a statement by 350 investors with $30 trillion in assets saying, please put a meaningful price on carbon. And these are interesting, very interesting developments. Carbon pricing already is on the rise. There are now 57 planned or implemented schemes around the world. Carbon is now a $82 billion market in 2018, which is an increase of 58% compared to 2017. So carbon pricing is on the rise. At the same time, I need to say that only 5% of carbon pricing mechanisms are priced according to the goals of the Paris Climate Agreement. So there's a lot of work to be done. But 1,400 companies already imply an internal carbon price. They say governments are moving too slow. We see the risk rising, and we want to make better investment decisions. We want to make sure that the investment decisions that we take today are still valid in maybe 5 or 10 years. And this is why they start using an internal carbon price, let's say a fictitious carbon tax, in order to improve their long-term decision making. Now, the idea, of course, would be to, what if we could leapfrog into the SDG era? Leapfrogging is generally associated with bypassing stages of technology that other countries have gone through. And we see incredibly interesting examples. For example, with Bangladesh providing more than 4 million homes with solar, providing more than 4 million solar homes, actually reaching out to 18 million people, providing solar electricity just over a period of 2003-2018. So these are massive developments. And Morocco, for example, is building the world's largest solar thermal power plant, again skipping the fossil fuel development. This Chinese city of Shenzhen has electrified more than 16,000 diesel buses over a period of 5 years, which is an incredible achievement. But leapfrogging is generally associated with technological development, but we think we can also look at policy leapfrogging. What if we can leapfrog to align financial incentives with the goals that we have in terms of the SDGs, but also economic growth, of course, and job creation? What if we can have growth based on human potential instead of natural resources, and tap into that potential of our populations? In the words of UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, tax pollution and not people. So thank you very much. Together, I think we can turn tax into a force for good. And I really look forward to our conversation today and hopefully in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Femke. So I think this is when we hand over to Omer to give a few reactions on what he's heard.
Thank you very much, Yenpe. They say it's toughest to speak in the end, more so when you are speaking after two very learned people. So I think pretty much all the important aspects were covered by Femke and before that you. I think this is the need of the hour in that the entire world is being impacted, as we all know, by the climate change, the impact on the environment, and it is high time that we start talking about these things. More so, developing economies, because of the lack of infrastructure and the abilities to deal with the repercussions of climate change, should actually be more focused in these areas. And I was really taken aback by the pictures that you have seen. I mean, we all see them around us, but it's when you put these things in perspective that the reality really hits you hard, how the things are changing. And if we do not start changing our course of action and leapfrogging, as Femke said, what could be the repercussions in, say, maybe our time or for our future generations for sure. However, the ideas certainly need to be communicated consistently, especially more so in terms of lobbying with the policymakers, the think tanks, the people who develop the thought process so that it can start taking roots. I shared a couple of important questions with you, which would really outline how the thought process at the two spectrums work. I haven't seen anyone who would say this is not a good idea. I mean, anyone you speak to would say, yes, it's really good. We should do this, and we should try to protect our environment. And if we can use tax as a force for good in doing so, what is better than that? Having said that, people do have their reservations. Earlier this year, we had that event that Yenpe was referring to, and you, Femke, were also there. You gave the presentation. So we had that interaction there with the policymakers too. And later on, even afterwards, I was in touch with Yenpe. We followed up with some of the key decision makers. And while they were appreciative of the idea, they were like, putting things into perspective that, okay, if we start doing that, we'll start losing the competitive edge. And we are still at the early stage where we haven't really tapped into our natural resources potential. And leave aside the developed economies, even if we look locally at some of the competitors in terms of business competition and economics. So those countries have developed more infrastructure and have tapped more into resources. So if at this stage, without a global consensus and some kind of a mechanism where such countries can be compensated for following these policies early, if we start doing that right now, we are a developing economy as well. We have to look for other options, provide economic opportunities to people. So how to balance that? And I think that is a very valid concern that needs to be addressed, and people need to be educated on that. Similarly, I was speaking to some friends back in UK as well as Australia, and they were like talking about the entirely other spectrum. They were saying, like, we all know UK's economy is primarily service-based. Financial services is a big component of that. So they were saying, how do you propose it should work out in an economy like ours, where the largest segment is services based and is using their natural resources to a minimal? So what would be the impact on the tax burden if we just start going on taxing the natural resources? One way would be that you tax at a comparatively higher rates as compared to other economies which are not based on service sectors. So I think these are important considerations which we need to work on and educate people about. Um, in addition to that, I think we also need to continue the efforts that you guys are doing and try to have a consistency about it. The like we can maybe plan a calendar event or something like that in the countries where we have started this debate, that we should have a frequency of events where we are following up on that debate. So the process is consistently going on. And obviously, when we'll be doing that, lobbying would be happening. Um, the reservations of people, policymaker, think tanks, they would be put out in front of us. We would get some ideas that can be addressed and incorporated, and hopefully that can lead to ultimately a space and a place where decision makers and people are more comfortable in adopting these policies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Omar. And they're very helpful thoughts, and agree with a lot of what you said. Femke, do you want to take a few minutes to answer some of Omar's points now, or should we move on to closing the closing poll and take the questions after?
Sure. No, I'd like to respond, and I'd like to thank Omar for his kind words and his interest. And I really do agree that that there is not one single perspective here. There is no silver bullet. There is just there is a big question on how to deal with these issues on a country by country, but also on a regional and global level. So to have this conversation is so valuable, and to continue and build on these conversations is very important. It will take time, it will take effort, it will take more research, also to look at what is the low-hanging fruits in different countries, what are the dynamics, what are the different sectors that would be vulnerable or stronger in future. So it's a massively interesting debate. And I really hope that we can continue to have these conversations with ACCA and its network, because it's extremely valuable to gain ideas and also different perspectives from around the world. So when it comes to a country like Pakistan, for example, I so much appreciate that we have had a conversation with many high-level individuals, and I would recommend that maybe we could also do a more specific analysis on what the risks and opportunities are for a country like Pakistan, and to look more closer into the dynamics there, and to see what the benefits would be, because of course competitiveness is super important. and to build competitiveness in a resource-restrained world is going to be more and more important as well. So tapping into human potential will be one of the keys towards competitiveness, I guess, in future. But to look at that from all the different perspectives would be really important to gain more support and more understanding. So thank you very much.
MK, I would also like to add some good news here.
Yes.
Since that last event, there have been some real positive developments. ACCA in its budget proposal also spoke about the carbon taxation, which is a core point of this report. And we had some really serious and fruitful discussions with the policymakers, and the interest is huge. So with the kind of efforts that we are doing, hopefully in a year's time or in due time, we'll be able to see Pakistan as one of the first few countries where a major segment of the taxation might be focused on this. There are a few taxes at the moment which are covering this area, but they are a very small proportion and they have multiple aspects. So this is not the core element. Secondly, the federal capital, Islamabad, has already banned the use of plastic bags. You might have heard that over the news, and it's going really successful. It's in the implementation phase, and there are already talks about extending that to the largest province in Pakistan, that is Punjab, which has almost 100 million population, more than 100 million. So there are also talks, if these steps go successfully, of educating people and starting with certain segments which are very high pollutants and perhaps introducing some sort of a charge, a tax on them. However, as you rightly pointed out, it definitely needs a lot of work identifying, as you rightly put it, the low-hanging fruits, the pits, the pros and cons with regard to every individual country, the region, and perhaps a global framework where this entire process can take shape. And certainly, it can't be done overnight. It would take the due time, but the efforts that we are doing, I'm really glad that you guys have taken this initiative, and the amount of research and effort you have put in this report really shows that how close this is to your passion and to your heart. And I look forward that after Bangladesh, hopefully we can have a similar research report for Pakistan and other countries as well. So thank you for your good work as well. Over to you, Yanpei.
That's really good to hear. Thank you, Omar. I thought I had a few thoughts that I might add to the competitiveness question, and also the question about an economy that's probably more service-based than natural resource-based. On competitiveness, yes, each country has its specific characteristics and that require careful analysis. But another way, of course, to address the challenges of competitiveness is for countries to work together. So we have, I think, on this call, people right across the region. So from Pakistan to Sri Lanka and UAE, if different countries' governments could agree on a common objective and start along the same path, then the risks of losing competitiveness will obviously be mitigated. And I know it's not easy, but it's definitely worth exploring that. And sort of looking at the country in itself, I think there was a question about how would this work for developing countries, and I think Femke's Bangladesh example really illustrates how the tax shifts could work in such an economy where more tax revenue is needed, and natural resources and phasing out those subsidies will already increase the tax revenue, as Femke pointed out. And then even though we're talking about reducing taxes on employment, as employers get incentivized to employ more people, and more people get decently paid work, they will start to enter the tax net, and I think and consume more as well. And overall, I think that will also benefit. Thinking about a service-based economy, I think it's an interesting question, isn't it? The link to natural resources might not be so evident, but even for a service-based economy, we are constantly consuming energy. We are still consuming different products, and if you think, for example, I think the question referred to companies mining, investing in cryptocurrencies. Cryptocurrency mining requires sort of a lot of server capacity, and those servers also use a lot of energy. Again, that's a cross-border issue, because where the service economy in that country might be requiring servers based in another country, in Iceland, for example. This may link to another big debate that is happening globally, led by the OECD, and that is, how do we tax the digital economy? What constitutes what constitutes the heart of a digital business? Where do we say a digital business value is created? And the OECD is looking at all sorts of different approaches. And not to say that this is this is a popular one, but where the servers are based, the servers are obviously an important part of a digital business. So all of that goes into the mix as well, as we think about tax policies in the round.
Yes, if I might add, Yen-Pei, in terms of service economies where the use of natural resources is minimal, can you hear me properly?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Good. You know, many countries. So where I come from, we have very minimal resources available. So we import most of our, a lot of our consumption is based on imports. And actually for the whole of the EU, we have issues with, we don't have our own resources, and we're very depending on other economies to deliver those products to us. So in terms of tax revenues, every economy will have their own dynamics in terms of services and consumption. So we always have to look at the aspects of a whole economy, and especially when there's consumption of fossil fuels or metals and minerals and plastics and a lot of waste being produced. There will always be tax bases for governments to put a price on, whether it is imported or whether it is sourced nationally. So this is where the competitiveness issue comes up again. There is a drive towards the circular economy. There is a drive to use fewer resources, to be less depending on fossil fuels. So countries that are currently the providers of those resources also will see the market changing, either shifting to other regions of the world or an increasing need to do more with less. So to use resources wisely and to try and add as much value for the population nationally or regionally as possible. And so in terms of the circular economy, this provides a lot of interesting new dynamics in terms of trade patterns and where resources will go and where do they go after the lifetime, after the life cycle of a product. So there's a lot to be found out on these issues. But when it comes to tax revenues, any country has the duty to protect citizens of harm, of pollution, and to provide a pathway or to enable the type of economic growth that can be sustained by next generations. So we need to think ahead, and we need to try at least and plan for that type of economic growth, whereby countries with a lot of resource extraction sometimes also have a large population that is in need of decent work. So to put one and one together and to try and accommodate for each of those needs. And that's a big challenge, and tax can, we think, play a key role in that. In terms of both raising revenues and in terms of using revenues, in terms of supporting industries A versus industry B, and in terms of, you know, also the structure of education and healthcare, for example, which are highly labor-intensive activities, and to at least enable the population to enjoy those services and be healthy and educated in order to again have opportunities in globally to use their potential. So these are vastly interesting topics, I think, and I would really love to hear your ideas more and on how this might work in your country, or the questions that you might have.
So before you take questions, just to add on to the conversation that you and Yenpe have built, absolutely agree. This is the need of the hour. We need to research. It's a long-term thing, and we need to see the various aspects. For example, Bangladesh was discussed repeatedly as a model as well as the next research avenue. Now, as you rightly pointed out, Femke, Bangladesh's largest export is from the cloth industry, the garment industry, and you might find, you would definitely already know, but most of our audience would find this interesting, that Bangladesh hardly produces any quality cotton. So that's mostly been imported into the country. But because of the other factors, the investment climate, the regional move of the investment, the extremely low cost of the labor, etc., etc., there has been a shift over the last few years, and then add on to that the GSP plus status, which allows them to export more competitively to the European markets, etc. So all these factors are there. Now, if you look at it, it seems like they are doing really good in terms of these SDGs, in terms of controlling pollution, etc. But we have to incorporate these factors, as you rightly pointed out, the various local factors. Now, if you compare that to another country like UAE or Pakistan, or even Sri Lanka, the factors would be much different. The trains are different, the kind of natural resources are different, the landscapes are different, the economic prosperity is different, and where they are in that ladder is different. So all these factors, it's a very delicate balance. We have to look at the countries both individually, as you rightly pointed out, as well as their relationship, the regional implications, and then the larger global question. So just wanted to add that. Otherwise, all the other points have been covered by your good selves. So.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Now, I wonder if we might, since we've got this discussion going, perhaps we could go on to answering some of the questions that have come in. And please do keep them coming in as well. We want to have as much of a full discussion with you as possible. So I think one of the questions that's come in has been about a concern that if we are putting tax on natural resources, won't this significantly increase the costs to operate for a business, and how do we deal with that? I have some thoughts on that, but do you want to take the question first, Femke?
Well, please give us your thoughts and I can expand on that.
Yeah, sure. So I think the idea of this tax shift is, first of all, we say we have to act now, but it can be gradual. So those taxes can be incremental. It will take careful planning, but for example, as has been done by some governments, I think the Swedish government, for their carbon taxes, they have set the increasing rate of carbon taxes 4 or 5 years into the future. So the increase initially is not so great as to disrupt a business, and it also having that forward view would already help businesses to plan ahead. And certainly with the use of tax revenues to reduce taxes on employment, that will reduce also some of the cost impacts for the business. And we are talking about changing business models now. So it's the expectation would be implementing this tax policy over time. Businesses will be pushed to change the way that they operate, partly also to keep the costs of operation at a level that they can sustain, and also hopefully ensuring then that the impacts on society is also a level that society can sustain.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, so to add to that, the concept is based on to be a shift. So it's supposed to be budget neutral for government. The idea is not to increase taxes, but to both raise taxes and use the revenues. This will look different in different countries again. So in countries where labor taxes are very high, it will be a reduction, as I explained in the European Union case study. In other countries where labor taxes are low or non-existent or hardly existent, there will be another way to use the revenues in order to fight poverty, etc. So this is what we partly illustrate in the Bangladesh case study. And there will be lots and lots of different options, of course, because there is no silver bullet. But these are scenarios to illustrate their impact. So when a set of policy measures is budget neutral for government, it doesn't mean it's budget neutral for each and every actor in the economy. So if there's, for example, a price on pollution, the bigger polluters will have to pay more in this scheme, and the ones who are already operating in a very clean way, they won't need to pay for much more for their operations. So there is a big difference between different sectors, and there is a big difference within sectors, because we've done a study on how a tax shift would impact different businesses and sectors, and what we found was that even within sectors, players have a very different pollution level. So there will be competitors, one against the other, who will have one might have a much larger for example, carbon intensity than another company, or a larger water intensity than another company. So when we look at, for example, the example of Heineken building this circular factory in Mexico in order to save water, if there is a water price introduced, this company will have a competitive advantage over those companies that have not yet taken steps to reduce their water use. And And this is exactly what is needed in the world today. The incentives do need to support and create a level playing field between users of resources, which there isn't right now. So as currently, if there is no price on pollution, there is no level playing field because the polluters don't pay, and the ones who try to do their best to reduce their, for example, water usage do need to pay because they need to invest in R&D, they need to invest in new factories. They might not set their location exactly where they want because they want to not yet, they understand that they don't need, can't be depending on water scarcity in future. So there's a lot more effort going into a sustainable business model than into the regular linear business model. So, and this is exactly what we're talking about when we say we should have the polluter pay and use the revenues to lower either the cost of labor or labor taxes, or use the revenues wisely to support social development as well as innovation. So yes, the question is very correct. I mean, there will be companies that will have to pay more and have a higher production cost. This will differ among sectors, so there will be more sectors that are much more polluting than others. Those will have a higher price to pay, but that is logic in a world where we don't want to externalize these costs. And then there are always opportunities for business to shift to different business models where, or products where they don't pollute as much or use as much water as they used to. So yes, this requires a lot of effort, and it's probably for some business quite hard. But then again, you know, evolving is in the DNA of entrepreneurs. It's what, you know, it's what they do best. It's adapting to changing circumstances in the market. And this will be another challenge to adapt to changing circumstances, but it will also provide them with opportunities. For example, the leapfrogging examples that I just gave, with regard to the solar homes in Bangladesh, for example, or the electric buses in China, there will be a much better business case for electric buses and solar homes once there is a price on carbon or on the use of fossil fuels. So it will be, there are literally thousands of business leaders just jumping, waiting for these business cases to be okay, so that they can claim the market and grow. So yeah, it does change the dynamics in business and competitiveness. There will be winners and there will be losers, but if we only focus on the losers, we will forget about all the winners and about the local and regional companies that have business opportunities once there is this shift in incentives. So I hope I've answered some, you know, part of the question. I mean, it's not straightforward, and it's what is an interesting development is that, you know, before there was a very, you know, monolithic interest in the business community. So if you are, let's say, an oil company, your sole interest is to sell oil. If you are a service company, your only purpose is to sell hours or time of your clients or of your employees. That is changing. Business models are shifting already. Within the portfolio of an oil company, there will be by now investments in clean energy. So the interest in clean energy, for example, is not just for the small businesses, but every single sector is already moving into that field. So it's not that there is a single interest. It's much more dynamic and complex. And what we do in this scheme is to create a level playing field between different types of users of resources, and then unleash, you know, the potential and the development of businesses to come up with these smart solutions and turn these business cases into economic growth. So Jan-P, if you maybe have another question.
Yes, I believe we have someone who has a comment in the question that he wanted to introduce verbally. Haroon, would you be able to unmute him
Yes, the name of the participant is Mia Ahmed Mahmood, Ehsan Mahmood. So Ehsan, if your mic is ready, I'm going to unmute you and then you can share your perspective with the participants. Okay, you are
Hi,
unmuted.
hello everyone, and hello to panelists as well as all the participants. I hope you can hear me. Um,
Great.
Very well.
Thank you. The topic is very interesting. However, how I look at it is a bit different, and as you guys are experts, so I want to have your opinion on that. Uh, as mentioned by Femke, NP, and Umar, there are a lot of challenges, limitations in implementing this. So we definitely need to have a carbon tax to have a sustainable future for all the businesses to grow. However, what I think is putting a tax, and when we say a carbon tax, then another question is what will happen to the organic taxes? So, okay, if we keep carbon tax separate, and our objective is to live in harmony with the nature, so that our lifestyle is basically sustainable. So what I think is that instead of putting a tax, what we do, because there can be so many problems with the tax. Like we have a specific attitude towards taxes, then tax is not sustainable because as the climate change is increasing every year, so maybe you need to increase the tax rate every year if you really want to have the objective which you want to achieve. So you need to increase the tax rate. And then who can guarantee that whatever you collect from these taxes will be actually spent on where it needs to be spent, for example, to neutralize the carbon impact, basically. So this is also another question. So I just think it from a point of view of a stock exchange. Let's say, let me give you an example, where there are organizations who are doing some conservation work. Let's say I'm planting trees, I am providing solar, and then there are standards organizations who can certify that. For example, you know that when you have an air travel, so you can calculate that how much of the carbon you have emitted. So if I am providing solar, if I am planting trees, so this can be calculated that how much carbon I have basically saved. So whoever is doing the carbon emission actually has to purchase those carbon credits from me. And the good thing in this model is that the impact is very direct. Organic taxes will stay there. You will no longer call it a tax. Whoever is doing more damage will have to pay more, and you can just imagine it as a new industry, and from our SDGs it will directly going to affect the poverty level, because most of these projects which the company like XYZ company who is providing solars, planting trees, other sustainable practices, so it will directly affect the people in the rural areas who are basically mostly all over the world who are living below the poverty line. So it will directly affect them. Then the impact will be very much direct with very immediate effects. And the third thing is you just think it like because a separate market, like for example now Coca-Cola has a specific environment footprint every year which can be calculated based on some standards. Yes, there is a lot of research needs to build those standards to make everyone agree to that. However, once you calculate that impact, then to continue operating, actually they have to buy those carbon credits because before they can go ahead to their next financial year, and then these costs will directly be absorbed into the product. The challenges will remain same: how to implement, what to do with the increasing cost, everything. But as you said, like, this is the right time to take action, and this is now when we have to take action. So this is just a broad, I don't want to take a lot of time. So this is how I think, instead of putting a carbon tax, to deal and achieve the same objective but from another route.
Wow,
Thank you
that's
very much
that's
for this
that's quite a
question.
question.
Do you want to go ahead with your thoughts, Omar,
Yeah,
Femke,
I'll
or
I'll quickly just share my thoughts before handing over to Femke, who is really the expert of the report and can share her thoughts. Well, I think what the gentleman is suggesting, though it sounds good, is fundamentally different in terms of the goals that are being addressed. I mean, as a force for good is coming from a very different angle. It's shifting the entire game plan. It's shifting the entire structure. It's proposing that the entire focus should shift instead of labor-oriented taxes to the taxes based on the consumption of natural resources. That's a fundamentally different model to the one that my friend here, the gentleman, was suggested, where the existing labor intensive and all the taxes can remain, and an additional industry can be created where the carbon taxes can come in a different form. Carbon credits can be brought, and then you can pollute as much as you want as long as you are able to pay for the cost, and then you can just build that in within your business plan. It has been advocated elsewhere. I've read quite a few papers on that proposals. Some of the industries and countries are already running the pilots of those, but I believe it is fundamentally different from what has been suggested in this report and what the goals and objectives are. So over to you, FMK.
Thank you. Yes, I understood the question also in terms of basically emission trading rather than taxation. So to create a market for these carbon rights. And again, as I said before, carbon is only one of the 100 options that we include in our story. So we shouldn't probably focus just on carbon, but just use it as an example. Yes, there are cap and trade systems in the world today. The European emission trading system is currently the biggest carbon market in the world. When China launches its emission trading system, it will be larger than that. And the trading system has worked very badly for a number of years because of the rights being too many rights being dispersed among industries. So let's say a cap and trade system has one advantage is that you can predefine the amount of emissions that are being allowed, and you leave it to the market to put a price on that. And now in the European example, the too many rights were actually dispersed, so the price per ton of carbon was extremely low, and not enough to have any impact on investment decisions. But now, recently, the European Commission has reduced the number of rights circulating in the market, and now the price has gone up to, I think, 20 euros per ton, which is actually becoming very effective in impacting the types of fuels, for example, used across the board. The difference between a tax and a trading system is that there is no clear price on a commodity, and that can be both an advantage. It can be very beneficial. Lots of great things have happened in these types of markets, but it doesn't actually help businesses. It can sometimes be unclear what the price is and when an investment becomes profitable. So also green taxes have been proven to be more effective in the way they work, more than standards. So there are a number of advantages that taxes have that trading systems don't have. I don't think there is one way to do this. There will be more and more ways to deal with climate change and the disruption and the pricing of those externalities, and also in let's say supporting the businesses that are doing good things. So I'm not saying this is the only way to go forward. What I'm saying is that if we continue on the path that we do now, that's the financial incentives that we have now, then the pathway is pretty clear. It will be linear, and it will be more destruction, and also fewer jobs because of the cost for businesses of hiring people, and therefore also more poverty. So if you connect those two together, I'm not saying that different systems cannot be combined. So this is not to say that tax is the only way to go, but if the incentives, as Omar said, remain as they are, we're not going to solve the issues that we have. So I think creative, different solutions are extremely valuable and should be explored and contributed to the international debate. And we think this alignment of tax with the goals that we have in terms of the SDGs is super important and really needs to be addressed in different countries and as well as regionally and globally.
Yes, thank you very much both. On the carbon credit trading system, Femke's explained some of the problems very clearly. I think I think the advantage that tax may have over them is, as you say, it's more transparent. So if you say put a consumption tax on a certain product, then the amount of the cost that's being passed on to consumers is clear for everyone to see. The same costs through a carbon credit system is also being passed on to consumers, but in that case, the system is would be much that the amount of costs being passed on would be much less clear, and also the other benefit being that the tax revenues can be reinvested to for broader SDG goals as well. And I wonder from hearing you talk, Asan, whether you were thinking that we were proposing a separate new tax. I think this may not necessarily always be the case, and indeed we don't want tax systems to get overcomplicated for many reasons, for businesses to be able to operate with them and to have a certain level of stability and also public buy-in as well. But there's a lot of what we're proposing that can sit within the existing tax system. So for example, taxing natural resource use and consumption, most countries already have fuel duties. We have indirect taxes that can be incorporated. And in using the revenues as well, we are sort of adjusting the amount of sort of personal income tax and payroll taxes, but that we're not talking about changing the system, and other tax incentives such as R&D, tax relief, and in investment incentives. All of those are sort of existing mechanisms that we can just sort of build on to add that aspect of sort of considering a business's external impact. And indeed, on R&D tax relief, that's a conversation that we're currently exploring in the UK with UK businesses as to how, for example, the UK R&D tax system might be updated or to incentivize circular businesses, for example, innovations for a circular economy. So these are just a few thoughts. I think one of the questions that's come in referred to people in the Middle East, I think in particular, preferring a no tax approach, and how introducing a tax system in the way that's being proposed will go down there. And I think certainly there are challenges, and culturally in some jurisdictions, perhaps it requires a mentality shift that sort of probably sees tax as not just a negative thing that companies must suffer, but also to think of tax as a way of, sort of engaging with society, for a business or an individual to contribute to that society, and actually to feel more part of the sort of actively participating in the society. I don't know whether you have anything you want to add to that, Femke or Omer.
Well, yes. You know the saying, taxes are what we pay for civilized society. And nobody likes to pay tax, first of all. I mean, it's pretty clear that nobody really loves to send a check to the government paying taxes. We all try and minimize it, or you know, so it's not that. It's a popular subject, and and that's why probably there is very little conversation about it. But we have to change that if we actually want to tackle these massive challenges that we're facing, not just nationally, but also internationally. We have to realize that pricing externalities or pricing the use of resources can actually help advance our economies and create safer and healthier societies. So, you know, it's both. It's not people not liking to pay tax, but it's also understanding that they are the basis for a society to deal with collective issues that individuals cannot solve, like most of the problems that are only growing bigger and bigger in this era. So it's about recognizing the fact that individuals cannot solve everything, and that we have to have collective means to address these collective challenges and threats, and to build stronger economies that are beneficial to our population, and that facilitates businesses to create jobs rather than pollution. So yeah, I'm sympathetic with you know, the call for no taxes at all. At the same time, we have to realize that that is not going to work, and also in the Middle East, where huge amounts of young people are unemployed, where you know the challenge of climate change are knocking at the doors, where the challenge of staying you know competitive in a 1.5 degree world is hugely important and is being recognized by leaders as well. So it's to start with this discussion. It's not easy. I'm in this field now for 10 years, and it's not easy to talk about tax at all. But I think we have to, and we have to address these collective challenges. Thanks.
Well, very well said. Not much left to elaborate anyway. I totally agree with what Femke and Yenpe has put. I'll furthermore add on to it that the challenges has resulted in the culture being shifted. I mean, we all know the VAT that has been introduced in UAE and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia as well. So there have been shifts in the cultural as well as the tax landscapes in the Gulf as well. There was a time when they had the resource which they believed would be unlimited. Secondly, the realization of the impact in terms of the environment and the consequences was not as clear as it is today. So all these factors, and there are certain additional things as well, they are coming together, and as Fede pointed out, there has been shift in the Gulf as well, where VAT has been introduced. People have accepted that. There are already been talks about income taxes being introduced in the next phase as well, to develop a sustainable economy, because as much as we all would love to have free lunches, unfortunately there are none in this world. So there is a cost associated with every resource, and that is basically the premise of this entire research report as well, that tax can act as a force for good if it is used as a cost for using the resources, using the natural resources. So taking forward that premise, I think the culture has been shifted. There are some shifts, and this process will continue to evolve. We have to remember that certainly it's an evolution, that is taking place and that would continue to take place. And as a result of that, people would realize more and more the consequences of the climate change. And these areas, South Asia, Southeast Asia, Middle East, these are some of the areas that are most impacted by the climate change as well. So hopefully the realization would get stronger and stronger with time. And you rightly said, Femke, nobody likes to pay taxes, and that's the conversation I've been having for last 15 years as well with the businesses, that it's just a necessary cost of your business. Treat it like that. Yes, we all love to minimize the cost and the taxes, but the fact of the life is you can't survive, you can't have a functioning society, let alone a civilized society, without paying your due shares of taxes. Over to you, Yenpe.
Yes, following that up, probably quite appropriately, there's a comment that's come in saying we Pakistani as a nation wants to pay taxes, but the problem is that will government spend it in the right direction? That's the major fear. And are there checks and balances for governments in other countries? I think it's sort of concerns that government are spending the tax revenue appropriately. I think this sort of communicating how the national budget is being used is a massive challenge in a lot of countries. In the UK, when you pay your taxes, you get a statement that shows sort of according to the amount of tax you pay, how much has gone to which servers, how much has gone to finance what. And I suppose that's a first step, but even the government here is still struggling to communicate that properly. And partly, I suppose, there's also what's needed is also a sort of public education about the role of taxes to start with. Well, some of the innovations that might help sort of to build trust and has been done on smaller scales now is participatory budgeting. So I think, for example, in the city of Paris has a certain amount of budget each year where citizens are invited to suggest what they want to do with that budget, and then vote on what should happen. So that is that's sort of possibly a solution in some cases. I'll hand over to you.
I was actually waiting for that question, because this question pops up in normally almost every session with anything to do with taxation. And I was surprised why still up till now it hasn't popped up. So finally we are here. I think you have adequately drawn a comparison. Basically, this is a question of trust deficit, and it's not just in Pakistan. If you look at this region, that's a common phenomena across this region. Entire South Asia suffers the same thing. There's that debate going on that we'll pay our due taxes once the government start delivering the standards of the developed countries or the Western or American standards. And the governments have been saying, well, you need to start paying your due taxes for us to be able to do that. So it's like that catch-22 situation. A good trend has been that technology lately has been used to try to make the processes simplified, easier, and try to win over the trust of the people. The taxation system and regimes are somewhat different to the Western systems. So like, for example, you gave example of UK and Paris, where local governments are very active, and people even have a participatory budget, and they are given details, and they are part of the process where they want to spend those budgets. Local government system in most of these countries are not as efficient or strong. So taxation normally is at the state or national level, where it does become very difficult to provide that sort of information, though certainly it would be helpful if that's provided. The way I see things is that paying our due taxes is not only a national and civic duty, it's also necessary for you, for your kids, for your family to live in a good environment and have the standard of life that you desire. So that is a cost you have to bear, just like if you want your kids to have private education and you'll associate with that more Yenpei. Most of the countries in this region have this trend that the parents want their kids to have private education if they can afford, rather than go to the public school. And they are more than happy to pay that cost, although those costs are usually very high. Why? Because they believe this would deliver value. So similarly, these taxes need to be seen as delivering value. For that, simplification of tax systems is very important. Structural reforms where subjectivity and ambiguity are removed are important. Use of technology, especially IT, has provided us so many avenues that is critical. Communication, as you rightly pointed out, is extremely important and vital. The more transparent the processes would be, the more just the taxation systems would be, as ACC also advocate in those 12 global tenets of taxation, the more confidence the ordinary taxpayer would have in the tax system. Having said that, these things take time. Again, it's an evolutionary process. It's not like a revolution that we'll have a discussion today and tomorrow, boom, the entire system would change. So we all need to play our part here, and even the taxpayers need to play their part. I mean, I know people who are able to afford taxes and who otherwise have no issues. I mean, they pay very high amounts in charities. And just the other day, I was sitting with a gentleman, and he was very proudly telling me that my charity bill is 100 times my taxation bill. 100 times. And I was saying, okay, great, fantastic. You are doing a good, noble cause. Hats off to you. But did you ever think that you are maybe doing something wrong in actually taking the right away from the lesser segments of society by not paying your due share of the taxes? Just yesterday, we had an ACCA event in Faisalabad. That's one of the larger industrial cities in Pakistan. And one of the conversation we had was around this, that look, yes, there is a difference in tax avoidance and tax evasion. We all want to minimize the taxation, and that's legal. But we have reached a point where you have to ask this question, whether that is ethical too. Are you using tax as a force for good? So we can't see these things in isolation. They are all components of the bigger picture. All of these things need to happen together. Regulators and governments need to have a shift in the taxation policies towards a more just and transparent system with less subjective measures. And similarly, taxpayers also need to be educated, and there need to be a cultural shift per se in realizing that this is the cost, a civic cost of ensuring that you are living in a society which offer the necessary standards, not just to you, but also to lesser segments of society where you are paying your due shares so that their living standard can be uplifted as well. Because if you don't do that, that would eventually come to hound you as well. I mean, we have gone through the history where there have been major shifts in the economic or other balances in various countries. French Revolution is something that we often quote. So we all know what can be the repercussions. So if this realization would be strong, if we as professionals play our part in educating the people, if the government and regulators play their part in winning over the trust of the public, then although it is difficult, but it's not something that cannot be achieved.
Thank you, Omar. Well spoken.
Thank you.
I don't think I have anything to add. Maybe the question was also about the checks and balances, and yes, there are checks and balances. We can check upon our governments on the way they spend the money raised. It's a bit easier in economies where there's a standardized form of reporting, or where there's comparison being made within a region, or for example within the OECD. So for companies countries to join that kind of reporting mechanisms really does help for the general public to keep an eye on the way it's spent. So to support that kind of development and standardization of data, I think is also very important. And this is where the financial community comes in. It's a very important role for finance professionals to assist governments as well as businesses to provide the proper data, both for understanding business dynamics and for creating better policies. So this is why it's so important that the ACCA is involved in this type of research, and that is spreading this message across its membership. So in order to hopefully engage more and more people in this research, and in order to create more checks and balances as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now I see we are coming up to time. So thank you very much for the very active participation and discussion that we've been having. This is really sort of what we would really love to have around the world, a lot more of these conversations. So I think we've covered a wide ground, and certainly we're not talking about a simple fix here. We're looking at changes in business models, changes in cultural attitudes towards tax, but I think certainly not changing anything is not an option, and these changes can be achieved if we start now, and each of us start spreading the discussion. So I don't know if either Femke or Omer want to have any closing words, and then we can close this session.
I would just like to thank all the participants who took time out today. It's a working day, and during working hours in such huge numbers, it's really great, and it shows the level of interest in this vital topic. And I would like to thank the entire ACCA team for organizing this. I would like to thank you, Yenpe, for handling the entire session, and I would like to thank Femke for her work, for the very well spoken narratives today, for explaining these concepts to us, and for all of you for doing these endeavors, because it's very important professionally, but I think it's important for us all as a humanity, because our future and survival depends on this too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Oh, can we please move to the last slide, and then we will have the contact details, and we could leave that there. So any more comments, please keep them coming at this address, and do check out the X-Tax project too. Thank you so much, Femke, and thank you so much, Omer, and thanks to everyone who's taken part. Hope you have a good rest of the day.
Thank you, you too.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.